At Christmas dinner in Lake Forest, with 200 guests gathered beneath the chandeliers, my dad raised his glass and smirked across the long, polished table. "You are just a gold digger." His words rang out clear over the clinking of silverware and the quiet background music. Laughter erupted in waves, bouncing off the high ceilings and filling the air with a cruel echo. My sister Jessica leaned closer, her perfume sharp in my nose. Her lips curled as she cut in with a voice meant for everyone to hear. 35 and still a filthy single loser. A fresh round of laughter followed, louder this time, as though the entire room had been waiting for that punchline. I sat in silence, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my mouth curved into the smallest of smiles. I said nothing. My silence was my shield. The warmth of the candles on the table should have comforted me, yet it only illuminated the sharp edges of humiliation. The roast beef and spiced wine might as well have been invisible. All I could feel was the heat rising in my cheeks and the vibration of laughter rattling my bones. My dad lifted his glass higher, basking in the moment like he had just delivered a toast that would be remembered for generations. Jessica sat glowing beside him, her hand resting proudly on the arm of her fiancé, Tyler. Tyler shifted in his seat. His smile seemed strained, though he kept it in place as if glued there. His eyes darted nervously between me and the man who would one day be his father-in-law. He was an account manager at Hartwell and Stone Partners, proud to be climbing the ladder in Chicago. Tonight was supposed to be about his engagement to Jessica, the glamorous daughter who could do no wrong. Yet the spotlight had turned cruelly in my direction, and he sat trapped between loyalty to Jessica and the discomfort of a joke, gone too far. The scent of pine and cranberry candles mixed with roasted garlic filled the air, cloying and oppressive. I drew in a breath, forcing myself not to flinch. The laughter continued a moment longer, then fell into pockets of whispers, guests nudging each other, eyes flicking back to me to see if I would crumble. For years, I had been the outsider in my own family. Tonight, they had chosen to make it public entertainment. I kept my face smooth, my smile faint, my heart pounding behind my ribs. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I thought of the many Christmases past. The house is always decorated to perfection on Shoreline Drive. My dad prided himself on throwing events that showed off his wealth and his status. Jessica was always the jewel at the center, glowing in sequined dresses, while I was tucked away in a corner chair like an afterthought. One memory flashed sharp in my mind. I was 17, eager to tell my parents that I had been accepted into Northwestern with a partial scholarship. Before I could share the news, Jessica twirled into the room in a designer dress and announced she had been asked to winter formal by the football captain. The applause and excitement swallowed my moment whole. My dad clapped Jessica on the shoulder, proclaiming how proud he was, while my acceptance letter sat unnoticed in my trembling hands. That night, I learned what it meant to be invisible in the house where I grew up. The years had only sharpened that lesson. Jessica launched her lifestyle brand with Dad's money. Tyler appeared at her side, polished and ambitious. Dad boasted of her successes at every business luncheon. Meanwhile, I had chosen a different path. I paid my own bills, worked long hours, and carved out respect not in their gilded halls, but in the quiet recognition of people who valued effort. Yet to my family, that independence was nothing but failure. My mom floated between tables, now her smile thin, her eyes avoiding mine. She carried another platter of roasted vegetables, her hands steady, though I knew her heart must have been racing. She had lived her life smoothing conflicts, patching over Dad's cutting remarks, never daring to challenge him in public. Her silence had always hurt me more than his words. Tonight she avoided my gaze completely, as though pretending I was not there might make the humiliation sting less. Guests leaned toward one another. I caught fragments of their murmurs. Is she really single at 35, poor thing? Maybe she focuses too much on work. Laughter lingered in their throats, even as they tried to soften it with pity. My chest tightened. I sipped from my water glass to keep my hands occupied. Jessica's eyes glowed with triumph. She whispered something into Tyler's ear that made him shift uncomfortably. He reached for his wine, drank quickly, and avoided looking at me. I wondered if he was embarrassed or simply complicit. The band in the corner played a gentle carol, the violin's notes trembling above the chatter. The contrast was almost unbearable, a song of peace floating over a room filled with judgment. I let my gaze drift toward the doorway. It stood closed, but the heavy oak seemed to promise change, as if at any moment the tide could shift. I told myself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. My pulse slowed. My silence was not a weakness. It was patience. Memories pressed in again. The day Dad told me I was wasting my degree by working as a consultant rather than marrying rich. He had shaken his head, muttering that no man would want a woman so stubborn. Jessica had smirked then, too proud to be the golden child. I had walked away that afternoon, biting my tongue until it bled, promising myself that one day my choices would speak louder than his contempt. Tonight those promises echoed in my ears. The humiliation burned, but beneath it was steel. Guests clinked glasses and waiters refilled champagne. Dad moved from one end of the table to the other, shaking hands, grinning broadly, relishing the laughter he had stirred. Jessica leaned back in her chair, tilting her head toward me, her voice just loud enough to carry. Poor Nora still playing at being independent? Some of us were just born to be adored. A woman across the table pressed her lips together, discomfort flickering in her eyes. Not everyone found it amusing. That gave me the smallest flicker of comfort. I pressed my fingertips lightly against the tablecloth, feeling the texture of the linen beneath my skin. My silence was my rebellion. Then, just as the noise began to swell again, the heavy oak doors opened. Cold air swept in from the foyer. Conversations halted. All eyes turned as a tall figure stepped into the room. Tyler's glass froze midway to his lips. His face was drained of color. "Boss, what are you doing here?" His voice cracked, carrying across the stunned silence. The room was frozen in silence, and 200 guests who had just been laughing at me now sat stiff and wide-eyed, their mouths half open as if waiting for the punchline to turn into something else entirely. The tall figure in this doorway stepped forward with a calm stride, his presence filling the space in a way my dad's booming laugh never could. Michael Hartwell, CEO of Hartwell & Stone Partners, looked nothing like a man who had stumbled into the wrong party. His sharp eyes swept across the room and landed not on Tyler, not on Jessica, not even on my dad, but on me. "Nora." His voice was firm yet warm. The sound of my name spoken with recognition cut through the humiliation still clinging to my skin. My breath caught in my chest. I had not expected to see him here, not tonight. Not in this house where every wall was lined with judgment. Jessica's hand tightened around her wine glass. I could see her knuckles pale under the strain. She forced a laugh that sounded brittle. Dad blinked rapidly, the flush on his cheeks deepening. Tyler's face turned the color of ash. I felt the weight of every gaze pressing down on me. My silence had carried me through their mockery, but now that silence was charged with something new. Expectation. Suspense. My lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. I simply nodded once at Michael, acknowledging him, grounding myself in the memory of how we knew each other. A year earlier, I had been assigned to a small project under his firm, never expecting it would lead anywhere significant. I was an independent consultant scraping by on modest contracts, often overlooked because I lacked the backing of a family name or an impressive pedigree. Yet I had thrown myself into that work with the kind of diligence born from necessity. While others clocked out at 5, I stayed until the janitors flicked the lights, determined that my numbers would be flawless. I never thought the CEO himself would notice, but one evening he stopped at my desk, asked a pointed question about my analysis, and listened as I explained. He had nodded, his eyes sharpening with interest. From that day forward, he treated me not as disposable labor, but as a mind worth listening to. That memory anchored me now as I looked back at him. Michael stepped fully into the room, shrugging out of his overcoat and handing it to a waiting server. The murmur of voices began to rise, guests whispering nervously, shifting in their chairs. Dad rose from his seat, his voice unsteady, though he tried to disguise it with cheer. "Michael, what a surprise. I didn't know you would be joining us tonight." Michael's eyes flicked briefly toward him before returning to me. He smiled faintly. "I heard there was a gathering worth attending." His words held layers, and I could feel Jessica stiffen beside Tyler. My dad gestured broadly to the empty chair near Jessica, trying to reassert control. "Please sit. Join us. We were just toasting." I almost laughed at that. Toasting. That was what he called his cruel proclamation that I was a gold digger. The memory of it still pulsed hot on my skin. Michael ignored the offered seat at first, walking the length of the table until he reached me. He extended a hand and instinct guided me to rise. His grip was steady, professional, but his eyes carried something personal. "It's good to see you again, Nora." I felt the collective intake of breath around us. The name, the recognition, the familiarity in his tone. Jessica's wine glass trembled in her hand. Tyler swallowed hard. My dad's forced smile barely held. I sat again slowly, my heart steadying. I had no need to explain. Michael's presence was explanation enough. The servers moved awkwardly, unsure whether to continue pouring champagne or freeze with the rest of us. A string of carols played softly from the quartet in the corner, yet the notes sounded out of place in the heavy silence. Michael finally accepted the seat near me rather than near Jessica. The tension stretched like a wire. Jessica leaned toward Tyler, whispering furiously, but his eyes stayed locked on the tablecloth. I remembered nights when I thought I would break under the weight of being invisible in this family. Nights when I cried alone in my small apartment after working 12-hour days, wondering if the sacrifice was worth it. Tonight, that invisible labor shimmered in the air between Michael and me, proof that it had never been wasted. My dad cleared his throat, his voice sharp with forced joviality. So Michael, I see you know our Nora. She has always had creative ambitions. The words dripped with patronizing dismissal. Michael looked at him evenly. She is one of the sharpest people I have ever worked with. That kind of talent is rare. Gasps rippled down the table. Someone dropped a fork. Jessica's cheeks flushed deep crimson and Tyler's jaw clenched. I kept my expression calm, though inside a tremor of vindication surged. My silence was becoming a weapon far more cutting than any retort. Jessica's voice sliced through the quiet. That's surprising. Nora never mentioned working with you. Her tone carried accusation, as if withholding that detail was an offense. Michael's brow lifted. Perhaps no one asked. The simple words landed heavier than any insult. My dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Jessica pressed her lips together so tightly they whitened. Tyler sipped his wine like it might save him. My mom finally appeared at my side, setting down a fresh dish of vegetables. Her eyes flicked nervously between Michael and me, then darted away. I wanted to reach for her hand, but I stayed still. She had lived her life balancing on silence. Tonight, she would have to choose her side in her own time. Guests began to murmur again, some praising Michael's generosity, others questioning how deeply he knew me. I caught snippets. So she isn't just a failure. Did you hear what he said? Sharpest person he's worked with. I knew there was more to her. Their words brushed over me like a cool breeze. Years of ridicule from my family could not erase this moment of recognition. Jessica leaned forward, her voice pitched to Carrie. My fiancé Tyler has been working closely with your firm as well. He is on track for great things. Michael inclined his head slightly, his smile polite but thin. Tyler is competent, he has potential. But competence and leadership are not the same thing. The statement struck like a gavel. Tyler's face flushed, Jessica's eyes widened, and the room fell into a hush once more. I felt my heart swell. This was not my doing. I had not begged for recognition or orchestrated this reveal. I had simply lived my truth. And now in front of 200 witnesses, that truth was undeniable. I thought of all the years Dad compared me to Jessica. Of the nights I wondered if choosing independence had doomed me to eternal invisibility. Tonight, with Michael's quiet authority, the balance shifted. Jessica tried again, her voice sharp. Well, Nora has always been dramatic. Maybe you misread her enthusiasm. Michael's eyes hardened. I do not misread talent. The sting of his words against her was visible in the set of her jaw. Tyler looked like he wanted to disappear beneath the table. I stayed quiet, my hands folded once more, my smile steady. My silence had never been so loud. The meal continued awkwardly. Guests pushed food around their plates, more interested in the unfolding drama than in roast beef or cranberry compote. Jessica drank glass after glass of wine, her laughter brittle when it came at all. Dad grew quieter, his authority bleeding out with every passing moment. I felt the weight of years lifting from my shoulders. The humiliation of being called a gold digger, of being branded a single loser, did not vanish, but it no longer defined me. Tonight, something else defined me. The truth that effort, dignity, and quiet strength had carried me further than their cruelty ever could. As the quartet played another carol, I let myself breathe more easily. For once, I was not the one shrinking under scrutiny. My silence had turned into a mirror, and in it, Jessica and Dad saw their own distortions. The night was not finished. I could sense Jessica's fury simmering, ready to erupt. I knew her too well to believe she would surrender the spotlight without a fight. But for now, I let the stillness wrap around me like a gift. The air inside the dining hall felt as heavy as the snow pressing against the windows. Michael's quiet praise still hung in the air like a verdict no one dared challenge. My dad's forced grin wavered. Jessica's glass trembled in her hand, and Tyler sat frozen beside her, as if the ground beneath him had opened. 200 guests shifted uneasily in their seats, caught between curiosity and discomfort. I sat with my hands folded, watching, waiting, knowing the silence was louder than any speech I could give. Jessica leaned forward, her smile sharp and her eyes gleaming with something desperate. She lifted her glass again, her voice pitched to sound playful, but the edge was unmistakable. We all know Nora has always loved to exaggerate. Surely this is just one of her stories spun into something grander. Her words slithered across the table, meant to undo what Michael had just given me. My chest tightened, but I did not move. I let my breath steady and my face remain calm. Michael's eyes narrowed slightly, his fork resting untouched on the plate before him. I do not mistake exaggeration for talent, he said simply, his voice even. I saw her work. It stood on its own. The words struck harder than if he had shouted. A murmur rippled through the guests. Some nodded, others exchanged wide-eyed looks. Jessica's smirk faltered, her fingers tightening around the stem of her glass until I feared it might shatter. Dad cleared his throat, his booming voice sounding less confident than usual. Jessica only means that family tends to overpraise each other. He gave a hollow laugh. Of course, Nora has done fine work. But let us not forget, we are here to celebrate Jessica's engagement. My stomach twisted at the familiar dismissal. All my life, he had redirected any praise away from me, making sure Jessica remained the star. Even now, when Michael himself stood as witness to my effort, Dad scrambled to bury me under his daughter's spotlight. Tyler shifted beside Jessica, his Adam's apple bobbing. His hands fidgeted with the napkin in his lap. He glanced at me, then quickly looked away, his face tight with unease. I wondered what ran through his mind, knowing his boss had just sided with the sister his fiancé despised. The string quartet struck a soft tune, trying to patch over the growing tension. The notes rang hollow. Jessica leaned toward Tyler and whispered furiously, her words hissing, her smile still plastered in place for the audience. I caught only fragments. Make him say something. Fix this. Tyler's lips pressed into a thin line. He lifted his glass halfway, then set it back down, as if he could not bring himself to act. I watched them all, my heart steady now. Years of humiliation had tempered me like steel. I remembered birthdays turned into celebrations of Jessica's new car, graduations overshadowed by her modeling contract, every milestone of mine swallowed whole by her theatrics. I had stood quiet then, too, my pride aching. Tonight was different. Tonight, silence no longer meant invisibility. It meant power. One of Dad's business associates at the far end of the table leaned toward Hoy, his wife, whispering not quite softly enough. Did you hear what the CEO said? Sharpest he has worked with. That is not nothing. His wife nodded, glancing toward me with new eyes. Jessica heard it too. Her face flushed, her mask slipping. She set her glass down with a sharp clink. Well, some people are good at putting on a show, she said, her voice brittle. She lifted her chin. But let us not pretend that makes them more than what they are. Michael's hand stilled on his knife. He looked directly at Jessica. I do not confuse a show with substance. My words are not entertainment. Her breath hitched. I saw it, the crack in her armor. Dad shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his collar, sweat beading near his temple. I sipped from my water glass, keeping my expression serene. My silence pressed heavier than her words. A memory surged unbidden. I was 23, freshly graduated, eager to begin working. Dad had invited his friends over for drinks. I came home excited to share that I had been offered a consulting contract. Before I could finish my sentence, Jessica swept in wearing a new diamond bracelet. The men laughed and praised her beauty. Dad clapped her on the back, and my announcement vanished into the noise. Later, when I tried again, he waved me off. Who cares about a little contract? Find a man who can take care of you. My throat had burned with unshed tears that night. Tonight, that old ache softened under the weight of vindication. Michael leaned back slightly, his presence still commanding. Nora's results have saved projects worth millions. Numbers do not lie. He turned his gaze to Tyler. You would know. Tyler flinched as if struck. Yes, sir, he muttered, his voice small. She was essential. Gasps echoed down the table. Jessica's eyes widened in disbelief, her mouth opening, but no sound coming out. Dad's jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening around his fork. I felt a surge of heat in my chest. Not humiliation this time, but something fiercer. Recognition. Justice. Jessica scrambled to recover her words, tumbling out too quickly. Well, anyone can play with numbers. That does not make them a leader. She laughed, but the sound cracked. Michael's eyes hardened. Competence and leadership are not the same, he said slowly. Your sister has both. The weight of the declaration pressed down on the room. Guests looked at me with new respect, their earlier laughter replaced with curiosity and something like admiration. Jessica's mask shattered. She turned on Tyler, her voice low but furious. Why are you letting him say this? Why are you not defending me? Tyler sat stiff, his eyes locked on his plate, sweat glistening on his forehead. He looked trapped, torn between the woman beside him and the man who held his career in his hands. I exhaled softly, my smile faint. My silence had done what words never could. The quartet's song ended, and for a moment no one moved. Then someone at the far end clapped politely too loudly, and others joined in. The applause awkward and hollow. Dad seized the moment, raising his glass again, his voice booming with forced cheer, to Jessica and Tyler. May their future be bright." The toast landed flat. Guests raised their glasses out of obligation, their eyes sliding back to me, to Michael, to the fracture splitting the Bennett family wide open. I lifted my glass too, my hand steady, my voice silent. The wine touched my lips, but I did not drink. Jessica's eyes burned into me. Her triumph had turned to ash. Her desperation was rising, and I knew she would not stop here. She would fight to claw back the spotlight even if it destroyed her. I sat straighter in my chair, breathing evenly. Let her fight. My silence was sharper than her words, and tonight it was cutting her apart. The clink of glasses had faded into a strained quiet. The applause from my dad's forced toast had died as quickly as it began, leaving the air thick and brittle. I could feel Jessica's eyes boring into me, her fury simmering just beneath the surface. Around us, the chatter had turned into low murmurs, every guest aware that the glossy image of the Bennett family was beginning to fracture in real time. I straightened in my chair, not to flaunt a victory, but to steady myself. My silence carried its own weight. I had no intention of sparring with Jessica or Dad. Still, I could sense the storm gathering. Jessica's fingers trembled against her wine glass as she refilled it with a shaky hand. The liquid sloshed against the rim, a sharp contrast to the poise she usually performed so effortlessly. Across the table, two women leaned toward one another, whispering, "So she is not just a failure. Imagine the CEO praising her like that." Their words reached my ears, faint but undeniable. I held my expression steady, though a warmth spread through my chest. For years, I had been painted as the disappointment. Tonight, people were beginning to see another truth. Jessica tilted her head back, draining her glass. She slammed it down harder than she meant to, making several guests jump. Dad shot her a warning look, but she ignored it. With a laugh that sounded far too sharp, she turned to Michael. "We all know how families are. Nora loves to play the victim. I suppose you bought into her story." The words cut, not because I believed them, but because they were so familiar. How many times had she painted me as dramatic, as ungrateful, as less than she was? I stared down at the tablecloth, tracing the fine pattern with my fingertip, choosing not to rise to the bait. Michael set down his fork and met Jessica's eyes. "I do not buy into stories. I evaluate results. Your sister's work spoke for itself." The firmness in his tone silenced the table. Jessica's mouth opened, but no retort came. Tyler shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his collar. His silence said more than his words ever could. Dad cleared his throat again, a nervous tick tonight, and forced another laugh. "Let's not make this into something it isn't. We are here for joy, not tension." He looked around as if begging for support. A few guests smiled politely, but the damage was already done. The string quartet played on, filling the cracks with music that felt out of place. My mom passed by with another tray, her eyes gliding over me with something like apology, though she said nothing. She had perfected the art of silence in her marriage, and sometimes I hated her for it. Tonight I chose not to. Jessica leaned closer to Tyler, whispering in his ear, her face tight with anger. He nodded faintly but did not look at her. When he finally raised his eyes, he looked directly at me, and then quickly away again, as though the recognition of truth burned too hot to hold. I let my mind drift for a moment, back to nights when I had fought simply to keep the lights on in my tiny apartment. Nights when Dad's refusal to help left me working 2 jobs. One winter, I had walked home in the snow after midnight, my shoes soaked through, my hands numb. I remembered curling beneath thin blankets, listening to the wind batter the window, telling myself that one day all this would matter. Tonight it did. Jessica poured another glass of wine, the bottle nearly empty now. Her laugh rang out too loud as she turned to a cluster of women nearby. She told them how Tyler was set for a big promotion, how their life together was only beginning. Her words tumbled out like a performance, each one trying to reclaim the attention she felt slipping away. The women nodded, though their eyes slid toward Michael, then toward me. Michael remained composed, his presence steady, unshaken by Jessica's show. He picked at his food with measured calm, as if he had all the time in the world. The power of silence was not mine alone. Dad rose again, walking to the far end of the table to speak with an old colleague. His laughter forced his gestures too broad. I recognized his attempt to distract, to steer the night back into his control. It had always worked before. Tonight it faltered. Jessica turned back to me, her smile brittle. "You are enjoying this, aren't you? Sitting there smug, letting him talk for you." She gestured toward Michael. I met her gaze, my face calm, my hands still. I said nothing. My silence was not smugness, it was strength. Her eyes flared and she leaned closer. "You are pathetic, Nora. You always have been." The words landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. Conversations halted, forks paused midair. I heard the faint intake of breath from several guests. Even Dad looked stunned, his mouth opening in protest, though no words came. Michael set down his knife with precision, his eyes locked on Jessica. "That is enough." His voice carried authority sharper than any shout. He leaned forward slightly. "You do not get to define her. Not tonight. Not ever." The silence that followed was deeper than before, heavy with the weight of truth. Jessica sat frozen, her face flushed crimson, her hand trembling against the stem of her glass. Tyler stared at his plate, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. I exhaled slowly, the air leaving my lungs like a release I had waited years for. My silence had not been empty. It had been a mirror forcing them to see themselves as they truly were. Guests whispered again, but the tone had shifted. Sympathy flickered in their glances toward me. Some shook their heads, others pursed their lips in disapproval of Jessica's outburst. I lifted my water glass and took a slow sip. The cool liquid steadied me. I looked down the table at my dad, who could not meet my eyes. For the first time in my life, I saw shame in his posture. The quartet shifted to a slower tune, the violins soft and mournful. The music matched the undercurrent of the room. Jessica sat rigid, her smile gone, her mask shattered. Dad's booming confidence had dissolved into silence. Tyler looked trapped in a cage of his own making. I sat still, breathing deeply, my heart steady. For once, the humiliation was not mine to bear. The night was far from over, but I knew one thing with certainty. I did not need to fight for recognition anymore. The truth was already unfolding on its own. The sound of Jessica's voice still echoed in my ears as I sat at the table. Calm on the outside, though, every nerve inside me trembled with energy. She had gone too far, calling me pathetic in front of 200 guests. Yet it was not her insult that lingered. It was the way Michael had cut her down with nothing more than a few measured words. "That is enough. You do not get to define her." The power of his presence filled the room in a way my dad's bluster never could. Jessica sat stiff, her cheeks blotched with red. She poured another glass of wine with a hand that shook so much the liquid splashed over the rim. Tyler leaned away from her, slightly embarrassed, his jaw locked. My dad avoided looking at anyone, staring instead at the roast beef congealing on his plate. The guests whispered more openly now. The tone was different from the laughter that had mocked me earlier. I caught fragments drifting across the table. "Did you hear what the CEO said about her work? Sharpest he has seen." Imagine being defended like that. I knew she wasn't just what they made her out to be. The shift was subtle but undeniable. Michael lifted his glass calmly, not in a toast, but in quiet acknowledgement of me. He spoke again, his words cutting cleanly through the room. "Nora is one of the sharpest people I have worked with. That is not opinion. That is fact supported by results." The hush that followed was absolute. I kept my expression neutral, though my heart swelled. For once, the truth stood in the open, undeniable. Jessica's laugh broke the silence, high-pitched and fragile. "You make it sound as if she is some kind of leader. She is not. She has always been dramatic, always exaggerating. That is what she does." Michael's gaze sharpened, his voice low but firm. "Leadership is not about drama. It is about results, resilience, and integrity. She has shown all three." Gasps rippled around the room. My dad's face went pale. Jessica's mouth opened, but no sound came. Tyler lowered his head. His shoulders hunched, his hands gripping the edge of the table as if to anchor himself. I inhaled slowly, tasting the heaviness of the air. My silence was no longer just self-protection, it was victory. I remembered long nights hunched over spreadsheets, the glow of my laptop burning into my tired eyes. I remembered nights when the rent was due and I was unsure how I would manage, nights when I lived on instant noodles while Jessica dined at steakhouses. I remembered my dad's mocking voice telling me I was wasting my degree. All those moments surged through me, transfigured into a fierce current of pride. I had built my own worth piece by piece while they laughed. Jessica slammed her glass down the sharp crack, startling several guests. "Enough," she hissed. "You are blind if you think she is worth anything. She has tricked you somehow. She has always been desperate." The venom in her words silenced the room. Michael leaned forward, his voice harder than I had ever heard it. "Desperate is the wrong word. Determined is the right one. She has carried more weight than you could imagine and never complained." I could see Jessica unraveling. Her fury, her desperation, the way she clutched at her collapsing mask. My dad shifted in his seat, sweat gathering at his temples, his authority dissolving in the face of Michael's calm certainty. Tyler tried to speak, then his voice halting. "Sir, maybe this isn't the right time to discuss." Michael turned his gaze on him, and Tyler faltered. "You know better than anyone," Michael said evenly. "You were there. You saw what she did." Tyler's mouth opened and closed, his face flushed crimson. "Yes, sir. She was essential. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth as if she could shove the words back in. She stared at Tyler, betrayed. He avoided her eyes. The whispers rose again, louder now. People shaking their heads, murmuring about how blind they had been, how cruel the spectacle had turned. Michael's voice carried once more. For too long, Nora has been underestimated. That ends tonight. My pulse pounded in my ears. I wanted to weep, not from shame, but from the sheer weight of the moment. Still, I stayed silent, my composure intact. Jessica's mask finally shattered. She half rose from her chair, her voice cracking with rage. She is nothing but a desperate gold digger, trying to latch on to anyone who will give her attention. The words rang out brutal and raw. Gasps tore through the room. Someone muttered an incredulous, "Oh my God." Michael's face darkened. "That is not only false, it is disgraceful." He looked around at the guests. "I will not sit by while slander is paraded as truth." Nora earned every bit of her respect. Jessica sank back into her chair, her hand trembling. Tyler buried his face in his hands. My dad stood abruptly, muttering that he needed air, and strode out of the room. His retreat was as loud as a confession. I sat still, the picture of composure. Though inside my chest, my heart hammered. The humiliation of years was unraveling in one night. The quartet's music stumbled, then steadied, but it could not mask the shock that had gripped the guests. Eyes darted between me and Jessica, between Michael and my dad's empty chair. I exhaled slowly, grounding myself. I had dreamed of a moment when truth would stand taller than lies. I had never imagined it would come in such a public way. A woman across the table leaned forward, her voice soft but clear. "I always wondered why they treated you that way. I see now it was never about you, it was about them." Her words settled over me like balm. For the first time in years, I felt seen. The night pressed on, awkward conversations rising and falling. Jessica sat in sullen silence, her wineglass untouched at last. Tyler shifted miserably beside her, unable to escape the weight of betrayal in her eyes. My mom moved quietly between tables, her smile fragile, her eyes full of something she dared not speak. I let my gaze rest on Michael. He met my eyes with a small nod, his expression steady, unshaken. For once, someone stood beside me, not because I begged for it, but because I had earned it. I closed my eyes briefly, breathing in the mixture of pine wine and roasted garlic. Tonight, the taste of humiliation had shifted into something else, vindication. The night was not finished. Jessica's rage simmered, and I knew she would not accept defeat quietly. But I no longer feared her cruelty. She could only destroy herself now. Jessica's outburst still hung heavy in the air, her words ringing with venom as she called me a gold digger in front of everyone. My dad had already stormed from the room, his absence leaving a hollow in the performance he had tried to orchestrate. The guests sat stiff in their chairs, their eyes wide, their whispers now sharpened into judgment, not against me, but against Jessica. I could feel it in the way they glanced at her, the way their lips curled, the way pity settled on me but scorn latched onto her. Jessica's cheeks were blotched, her mascara smudging from tears she refused to let fall. She reached again for her glass of wine, spilling some onto the pristine white cloth as she tried to steady herself. Tyler shifted beside her, his shoulders tense, his hand twitching as though he wanted to take the glass from her, but thought better of it. He looked like a man caught between a woman unraveling and a boss who had just revealed where true power lay. Michael sat calm, his fork set neatly on the plate, his eyes steady. He did not need to raise his voice. His presence commanded more than noise ever could. He finally spoke, his words measured and deliberate. "Enough has been said tonight. Nora has proven herself many times over. To suggest otherwise is beneath us all." The guests murmured their agreement. I caught sight of an older man, who had been one of Dad's business partners, nodding gravely. His wife whispered something into his ear, and his lips pressed thin. They were not laughing anymore. Jessica let out a brittle laugh. "You are blind," she said, her voice cracking. "She has you fooled. She always plays the victim." Michael's gaze did not waver. "I am not fooled. I see what others missed." Her laughter died. She slammed her glass down again, the sound sharp, the wine splattering across the table. Some of it reached my hand. The liquid was cold against my skin, but I kept perfectly still. I remembered the winters when I walked home in soaked shoes because I could not afford a car. I remembered the hollow feeling in my stomach when I rationed groceries to make the rent. I remembered my dad telling me no man would ever want me if I worked myself into the ground. Those years had carved me into steel. Tonight that steel held me steady while Jessica splintered. The band in the corner tried to continue playing carols, but their notes trembled with unease. The violinist glanced toward the door, as if he longed to slip out with his instrument and vanish into the snow. Jessica's voice rose higher. You think she is special, but she is not. She is pathetic. Michael's hand pressed flat against the table, his patience thinning. Pathetic is a word people use when they are afraid to face themselves. He looked at Jessica with a gaze so sharp she faltered and sat back down. Tyler finally spoke, his voice low and halting. Sir, maybe we should end this dinner before it gets worse. Michael turned his eyes on him. Worse for whom, Tyler? For her or for you? The color drained from Tyler's face. He glanced at Jessica, but she was staring at me, her eyes filled with hatred. I breathed evenly, my silence intact. The rage around me only emphasized the calm inside me. One guest, a woman I vaguely recognized from the country club my dad loved to boast about, leaned forward and said softly to her husband, "It is painful to watch her do this to herself." The words floated across the table, and Jessica heard them. She flinched as though struck. Her desperation cracked open fully then. She rose to her feet, pointing a trembling finger at me. You stole this night from me. It was supposed to be about my engagement, my life, my future, but you cannot stand to let me have anything. The room gasped. All eyes shifted to me, waiting to see if I would respond. I looked at her, my expression calm, my hands still resting neatly in my lap. I did not speak. My silence stretched like a taut string until the air itself hummed with its weight. Michael finally cut through. Nora did not steal anything. The truth cannot be stolen. Jessica's chest heaved, her breath shallow. Tyler pulled at her sleeve, whispering urgently, "Sit down, please." She yanked her arm free. I thought of the years when she had stolen my milestones, my scholarship lost in the noise of her high school dance, my graduation drowned by her engagement announcement, my small victories erased by her need for a spotlight. Tonight the reversal was not of my making, it was hers. She had handed me this power with every cruel word she had spoken. Jessica's face twisted with frustration. "You will never be better than me," she spat. "Even if he pretends to like you, you are still nothing." Michael's expression hardened. "She is not nothing. She is the reason your fiancé kept his job this year." The silence that followed was deafening. Gasps rippled again. Jessica whipped her head toward Tyler, disbelief painted across her face. Tyler's lips parted, his eyes wide with panic. He stammered but said nothing. The guests erupted into whispers. I caught words like incredible, so she saved him. I had no idea. The judgment shifted once more, sympathy pouring toward me, disdain cutting sharper at Jessica. Jessica swayed on her feet, her knees buckling slightly. She sank back down into her chair, her hand covering her mouth. Tyler sat stiff beside her, his face pale, his hands clasped tight in his lap. I remained still, my breath slow, my expression unreadable. Inside a storm of memory swirled. The long nights when Tyler and I had worked side by side on a project, his stress mounting, his mistakes nearly costing him his job. I had corrected those mistakes, quietly choosing not to expose him. Michael had known. He had seen. And now that truth stood in the open. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. She whispered hoarsely, "You chose her over me." Michael replied calmly, "I chose merit over pretense." Her sob cracked the air. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. The dinner had dissolved into something unrecognizable. Plates sat half-eaten. The decorations gleamed pointlessly. The carols faltered. The perfect evening my dad had envisioned was rubble. My mom stood near the wall, her hands clasped, her eyes glistening. She looked at me for the first time that night, really looked. There was sorrow in her gaze, but also something else. Recognition. I inhaled deeply, letting the scent of pine and roasted garlic wash over me. For years, my silence had been a prison. Tonight, it was my freedom. The room shifted again, settling into uneasy quiet. Jessica wept silently. Tyler sat paralyzed. My dad was gone, and the guests had seen everything they needed to see. I did not need to move. I did not need to speak. My silence was complete. The dinner table had become a battlefield without anyone lifting a hand. Jessica sat collapsed in her chair, streaks of mascara lining her face, her wine glass abandoned and tilted on its side. Tyler stared into the distance, trapped between shame and dread, while my dad remained absent, the weight of humiliation driving him from his own home. The guests were still gathered, their plates cold, their bodies stiff, their whispers now transformed into quiet verdicts. What had begun as a celebration of Jessica's engagement had turned into a slow unraveling of everything my family once projected. I breathed steadily, my hands folded on the table, feeling the texture of the linen beneath my palms. Silence had been my defense for so long, but tonight it had become something sharper. Every glance, every murmur, every nod in my direction told me that I no longer carried the shame. Jessica carried it now. Michael leaned back in his chair, his eyes sweeping the room, measuring the faces that stared back. His voice came low and clear. Talent and integrity are what matter. Not titles, not family names. His words floated above the ruined table like a benediction. Jessica flinched, her eyes flashing. She slammed her hand down, rattling silverware. That is easy to say when you have everything. She looked at me, her face twisted. You have always been jealous of me, Nora. I lifted my eyes to hers. I said nothing. The silence stretched until it seemed to press against her chest. She fidgeted, her fingers clutching at the edge of the table as if it might save her. Michael turned slightly, his gaze steady. Jealousy does not build resilience. It destroys it. He looked at Jessica until she looked away. The whispers began again. I heard pieces float through the air. She cannot accept responsibility. Poor Nora, she has endured too much. It felt surreal hearing strangers who once pitied me begin to see the truth. Jessica turned to Tyler suddenly, her voice sharp and rising. Say something. Tell them I am not the fool here. Tell them she is manipulating everyone. Tyler's throat worked as he swallowed. He glanced at Michael, then at me. His voice trembled. I cannot. You know she saved me. You know she fixed my mistakes. Without her, I would not even have a job. Gasps rippled across the table. Jessica's face contorted, her breath quickening. You are supposed to be on my side. I watched the collapse unfold, my pulse steady. I thought of all the years when my side never existed, when every person in my family lined up behind Jessica, behind Dad, behind the image they clung to. Tonight, the illusion had shattered. Jessica's voice cracked as she shouted, You humiliate me in front of everyone. Do you realize what you have done? Her words struck Tyler, but he only shook his head, his eyes dropping to the tablecloth. Michael's voice cut through once more. Respect is not built on pretense. It is earned, and Nora has earned it. The guests shifted, nodding in agreement. I caught the eye of a woman near the far end of the table. She smiled faintly, her expression gentle. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not through the filter of my family's disdain, but as I truly was. Jessica let out a sob, covering her face. Her shoulders shook, her breaths uneven. The guests turned away politely, though no one missed what was happening. The jewel of the Bennett family was cracking in plain sight. I remained still, my lips curved into the faintest smile. I had no need to strike. She was dismantling herself. My memory wandered again, unspooling nights when Jessica had stolen my light. My 25th birthday, when she announced her new business venture, and Dad showered her with praise, leaving me to slice my own cake unnoticed. My small promotion celebrated by no one because Jessica had shown up with an engagement ring from Tyler. Tonight, those memories lost their sting. I saw them for what they were, acts of desperation from a sister who feared invisibility more than anything. The string quartet struck a hesitant chord, trying once again to fill the silence. The melody wavered like breath caught in a throat. Jessica lifted her head, her eyes swollen. You will never win, she whispered hoarsely. Even if they believe you now, you will always be alone. Her words did not pierce me. They fell flat, powerless. I inhaled deeply, letting the scent of pine and roasted garlic steady me. Being alone had built me. Being alone had not destroyed me. Michael rose from his chair slowly, his presence towering without effort. He glanced down the table. I believe we have seen enough for one night. His tone was final, leaving no space for rebuttal. The guests murmured, some rising from their seats, eager to escape the tension that clung to the walls. Chairs scraped against the floor, shoes clicked on the polished wood. Voices overlapped in uneasy chatter. The party was disbanding, not with fanfare but with the hush of a broken performance. Jessica sat slumped, her fiancé silent beside her, her triumph turned to dust. My dad remained absent, his pride shattered. My mom lingered by the doorway, her eyes fixed on me, her face unreadable. I stood slowly, smoothing the fabric of my dress. My hands no longer trembled. My silence was complete. The night was not over, but its outcome had already been written. Guests began filing out of the dining room with their coats pulled tight. Their voices hushed, their eyes darting back one last time at the wreckage of what had been billed as a grand Christmas celebration. I sat at the table and watched the room empty, the plates of untouched food, the glasses tipped and half full, the decorations gleaming as though mocking the collapse. Jessica slumped beside Tyler. Her face blotched, her hair in disarray. Her once perfect image dissolved into something raw and desperate. Tyler kept his eyes fixed on the table, his shoulders hunched, his body taut with shame. The sound of the quartet packing up their instruments echoed through the silence, the click of violin cases and the muted thump of a cello being lifted. I breathed in slowly, feeling the cold draft sweep through the door as another group of guests slipped away. Every departure was another judgment passed, another whisper that would ripple through Lake Forest by morning. Jessica wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing what remained of her mascara. She turned suddenly to me, her voice hoarse but sharp. "You think this makes you better than me, don't you? You think because he praised you, you have won." I did not answer. My silence was heavier than her words. I reached for my water glass, my hand steady, and took a sip as if her accusation were nothing more than background noise. Michael rose from his chair, slipping into his coat with quiet authority. His gaze swept the room once more. He looked at Jessica briefly, then at Tyler, then finally at me. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "Remember, respect is not given. It is earned." He nodded toward me, then turned and walked toward the foyer, his footsteps steady, the click of his shoes a reminder that dignity leaves no debris behind. Jessica's mouth twisted. She slammed her fist lightly on the table. "Do you see what you've done, Nora? You made him walk out on us." I set down my glass and met her gaze. For the first time all night, I let myself speak. "He did not walk out on me." Her lips parted in shock. She wanted another fight, but the words tangled in her throat. Tyler shifted, his face pale. He murmured something I barely caught. "Maybe it is time to stop, Jess." She turned on him, her fury reigniting. "Stop! You should be defending me. You are supposed to be on my side." His voice trembled. "I cannot defend what you did tonight." Her breath hitched. She stared at him stunned, then slapped his arm hard enough to draw gasps from the few lingering guests. "How dare you?" I sat still watching, remembering years of being slapped with words just as sharp. Tonight it was no longer mine to bear. Aunt Martha stepped forward from the corner where she had been sitting, quietly all evening. She was my mother's older sister, a woman with silver hair neatly pinned and a voice that always carried the weight of authority. She walked to my side of the table and placed her hand gently on my shoulder. "I always knew you were stronger than they gave you credit for." Her words cut through the silence like balm. Jessica's eyes widened, her lips trembling. "Even you, Aunt Martha." Aunt Martha's eyes did not soften. "Especially me. I saw it long ago. You just refused to see it." I closed my eyes briefly, her words sinking deep. For years I had been invisible in this family, the afterthought at every event. Tonight someone had chosen to stand beside me. My mom hovered in this doorway, wringing her hands. Her eyes darted from Jessica to me, torn, conflicted. She said nothing, but her face betrayed the war inside her. I let my mind drift back to a winter years earlier, when Dad had made a reckless investment that failed miserably. He had stood in the kitchen raging, blaming Mom for distracting him, blaming me for not warning him. Even though I had been 20 years old with no seat at his table, he had never admitted the failure as his own. Tonight I saw the same pattern playing out, but the spotlight was no longer mine to bear. Jessica sobbed, suddenly turning back to Tyler. "You ruined everything for me." He looked at her, his voice barely above a whisper. "No, you ruined it yourself." The words echoed across the table, final and unflinching. Jessica crumpled in her chair, her sobs breaking into hiccups. The guests who remained averted their eyes, some shaking their heads. A woman I recognized from Dad's hardware business leaned to her husband and whispered it was bound to come out. "You cannot hide the truth forever." I stared down at the tablecloth, tracing the embroidered holly leaves with my fingertip. My silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the weight of justice unfolding in its own time. Tyler pushed back from his chair, the scrape of wood on wood loud in the hush. "I need some air," he muttered, and walked toward the door, leaving Jessica alone at the table. She watched him go, her face crumpling. She turned back to me, her voice desperate, ragged. "You took everything from me." I lifted my gaze to hers, calm, steady. "No, Jess. You lost it yourself." Her sobs filled the room, echoing against the high ceilings. I sat quietly, my chest rising and falling with slow breaths. For years I had carried the burden of her ridicule, of my dad's contempt, of my mom's silence. Tonight I carried none of it. Tonight they carried it themselves. The lights of the Christmas tree glowed in the corner, the ornaments glittering against the shadows. I let the sight wash over me, a reminder that even in a house filled with cruelty, beauty could still stand untouched. The night was not finished. The aftermath had only begun. But as I sat in the wreckage of the dinner, I felt something I had not felt in years: freedom. The Christmas dinner ended not with music or toasts, but with silence heavy, enough to crush the air. Guests slipped away through the great oak doors, their coats clutched around them, their voices low with gossip that would spread across Lake Forest by morning. I left quietly, walking out into the cold December night. The snowflakes falling against my cheeks like tiny sparks. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, so different from the suffocating mix of perfume and wine inside that house. My heels clicked against the stone walkway as I walked to my car. I did not look back. The drive back to Chicago felt like slipping into another life. The highway was dark, the snow whipping sideways under the headlights, the silence inside the car broken only by the hum of the engine. I gripped the steering wheel tight, my heart still pounding, not from shame anymore but from release. My father's house, my sister's cruelty, the laughter of 200 people had not destroyed me. They had revealed themselves. By the time I reached my apartment on North Clark Street, the city lights blurred through the snow. I pushed open the door, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto the couch. My body felt heavy, but my chest lighter than it had in years. I stared at the twinkling lights of my small Christmas tree in the corner. They glowed softly fragile yet steady, like a reminder that even in darkness something could shine. The next morning, the phone rang before I had even made coffee. I let it go to voicemail, but the message played out loud on the machine. It was my dad. His voice was harsh, clipped, full of blame. "You embarrassed me in front of my colleagues. Do you realize what you have done? You ruined everything." His words filled the room, echoes of every accusation he had ever hurled at me. I sat still, my hands wrapped around a mug of cooling coffee, listening until the machine clicked off. He had never called to ask if I was all right. He had only called to place the blame squarely on me, as always. I thought of all the times he had done it before. When his business deal failed and he claimed my questions had distracted him. When Jessica stumbled in school and he said my example had not been good. Enough. When Mom looked weary from his demands and he insisted it was because I had not supported her enough. His pattern was carved into my bones. He had always needed someone to carry his shame. The phone rang again. This time it was Jessica. I hesitated, then let it go. Her voice spilled out next, raw and broken. "I cannot believe you did this to me. Tyler is gone. My friends are gone. Dad is furious. You destroyed everything. You are a monster." Her sobs filled the small room, jagged and sharp. I stood frozen, the phone buzzing against the counter, my chest tightening. Even now, when she was the one unraveling, she needed me to carry the weight of her collapse. I turned off the machine. The silence that followed was thick but cleansing. I would not take their blame anymore. Later that day, an envelope arrived, slipped under my door. My name was written in my mother's careful hand. I sat on the couch and opened it slowly, my fingers trembling. Inside was a note on cream-colored stationery. "I should have defended you. I am sorry. For years I stayed quiet because it felt safer, but last night I saw what my silence cost you. Please forgive me." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. It was the first time she had ever admitted her part. The first time she had chosen me over Dad. I pressed the letter to my chest, feeling both grief and gratitude twist together. That evening, I walked down to the cafe on the corner, the one with the warm lights and the smell of cinnamon rolls drifting onto the sidewalk. I sat with my notebook open, writing down every thought, every memory. I needed to put it somewhere before it consumed me. The chatter of other customers surrounded me, ordinary and soothing. A woman at the next table laughed with her granddaughter, their hands brushing as they shared a pastry. The sight made me ache, but it also reminded me that not all families were like mine. The days after the dinner blurred into a rhythm of calls I did not answer, and gossip I overheard. Word traveled quickly. Dad lost a contract with a longtime client who had attended that night. His reputation was bruised. Jessica's engagement dissolved officially when Tyler sent out a statement to his friends that they had parted ways. Jessica's circle of wealthy acquaintances thinned, her invitations rescinded. She became the whisper in hallways instead of the shining star. I stayed quiet, watching from the outside. For once, their unraveling did not drag me down. One evening, as snow piled high on the sidewalks, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Jessica stood there. Her coat was unbuttoned, her hair unkempt, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Her voice was shaky. "Tyler left me. My friends will not answer my calls. Dad will not look at me." She stared at me, her eyes red. "You took everything from me." I stood still, the letter from Mom still tucked on my desk, her apology still fresh in my mind. Jessica's words did not sting the way they once would have. I saw her for what she was, a woman terrified of being without an audience. I spoke softly, my voice steady. "No, Jess. You lost it yourself." Her mouth fell open. Tears welled again, spilling down her cheeks. She sank onto my couch, her sobs filling the room. I sat across from her, my hands folded in my lap, my heart heavy yet firm. For years I had wished for her love, for her acceptance, for any sign that she saw me as more than a rival. Tonight I understood that wishing for that had been my mistake. Some people could not love without needing to destroy. I let her cry, offering no comfort, no words. The silence between us was final. When she finally rose to leave, her face pale and streaked, she looked at me one last time. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You will regret this." Then she stepped into the hall and closed the door. I sank back into my chair, staring at the glowing lights of my Christmas tree. My body trembled with exhaustion, but my chest felt lighter. Sometimes revenge was not about destroying someone. Sometimes it was about standing still long enough for them to destroy themselves. The snow outside fell thicker, blanketing the city in silence. I sat with my mother's letter in my hand, and Jessica's voice still echoing in my ears. For the first time, I did not feel like the outsider. I felt like someone who had finally stepped into her own life. The city was wrapped in snow and quiet when I woke the morning after Jessica's visit. The streets outside my window gleamed white, the world hushed as if holding its breath. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, warming my hands, staring at the letter my mom had written. Her words still echoed inside me. "I should have defended you. Please forgive me." For years I had waited to hear something like that, and now that it sat in my hands, I felt both sorrow and relief. It was too late to rewrite the past, but not too late to acknowledge it. My phone buzzed with messages, but I left it face down. News about my family was already moving fast. My dad's reputation had taken a hit, his business contacts whispering that the Christmas dinner had exposed more than he wanted. Contracts slipped through his fingers, people questioning whether they wanted to be tied to a man who humiliated his own daughter in public. Jessica had become the subject of gossip among her friends. They had built her up for years, admiring her shine, but now they were just as quick to turn their backs. Tyler had disappeared from her life, her engagement broken without ceremony. I stirred sugar into my coffee and thought about how strange it was to witness the collapse of something that had seemed untouchable. I had spent most of my life believing they were stronger than me, believing that their laughter was truth. Now I saw it for what it was: fragile, built on lies and appearances. Later that week, my mom called. Her voice was tentative. "Nora, can we talk?" I hesitated, then agreed to meet her at the cafe on the corner. She arrived bundled in her coat, her hair tucked under a knitted hat, her eyes lined with exhaustion. She slid into the booth across from me and held her mug with both hands. "I wanted to apologize in person," she said softly. "I should have stopped him. I should have spoken up for you." I looked at her, the weight of years pressing down. I wanted to tell her how many times her silence had cut deeper than Dad's words. But instead I said quietly, "You were afraid. I understand." Her eyes filled with tears. "I was afraid of him, afraid of losing what little peace we had. But I see now what it cost you." She reached across the table, her hand trembling. "I am sorry." I placed my hand over hers. For the first time in years, I felt a thread of connection. Not enough to erase the past, but enough to begin something new. That night, sitting in my apartment, I reflected on the word revenge. For so long, I had imagined it would mean striking back, proving them wrong with some grand gesture. But the truth had unfolded differently. My revenge had been silence, patience, letting time reveal what words never could. My family had destroyed themselves under the weight of their own cruelty, and I had simply stood still long enough to let it happen. A week later, I received a call from Michael. His voice was steady as always. "Nora, we have a new project starting international this time. I want you on it." I closed my eyes, the swell of emotion rising in my chest. It was not just a job offer. It was validation, recognition that my work had value far beyond the walls of my father's house. I thought of Jessica's words the night of the dinner. 35 and still a filthy single loser. I smiled faintly, shaking my head. I was 35, single, and standing on my own 2 feet. There was nothing filthy about surviving, about building a life with my own hands. I stood by my window watching the snow fall against the city lights. I thought about my dad, who still had not called again. I thought about Jessica, who had tried to pin her downfall on me. And I thought about my mom, who had finally spoken the words I had waited my whole life to hear. None of it erased the pain, but all of it added up to something bigger: transformation. As the year turned, I understood that revenge was not about destruction. It was about reclaiming myself. My silence had been mocked, but in the end it became my strength. My patience had been mistaken for weakness, but it had carried me further than their cruelty ever could. Sometimes I still hear their voices in my head, the laughter at the dinner table, the sting of their words. But then I hear my own voice, calm and steady. I am not what they said. I am more. For the first time, I no longer felt like the outsider in my own story. I felt like the center of it. I felt like I belonged not in their approval, but in the life I had built for myself. If you have ever been humiliated by the people who should have loved you most, if you have ever chosen silence when the world expected noise, then you know what I mean. Silence can be revenge. Survival can be victory. Tell me, have you ever faced something like this? Have you ever chosen dignity over noise? I would like to hear your story. Share it in the comments. And if mine touched you, do not forget to like and subscribe. There are more stories waiting to be told.